Hello and welcome to this very first live How to Be a Great GM video. Well, I have already made the mistake of no audio, so hopefully you're now getting my audio loud and clear. So hello there, I see so many of you have joined us already. I mean 46 people. This is just a test that I'm doing, but I cannot tell you. I grew up, well, my previous job anyway was working in television, and I've gone and done live shows with people like Oprah Winfrey and ABC in the USA and BBC and SABC, and I'm as nervous as I was on my very first show. So thank you for being here for this very first one. And I'm just seeing the comments rolling in. How is the audio? It's all good. Is that fine? Is that coming through there? I'm just seeing. Absolutely, it doesn't look like anyone's got any problems. Oprah is the devil. Well, I don't know about that. She was lovely to work with, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent with her. Anyway, all right, so on to today's test. So now, I just said I'm doing a test, but what I actually wanted to do was to run through a usual show for you so that you could ask questions whilst I'm going through the material that I prepared for you. Now, if that sounds like a good thing, well, put your hands up, let's say yes, and let's carry on with this. Otherwise, I'll shut up and go home and take a couple vodka, I think, because this is fantastic. I really, really appreciate you all being here. So, yes, shall we carry on? Shall we move forward? Question for the good man. How do you get your family members to open up to you? That's interesting. I'm not sure about that, although that does sound more like Oprah's kind of questions. Okay, so today we are talking about rewarding post-combat. So you've had your encounter, you've had your setup, everything's been great. The monsters are now slain, your PCs are victorious. What do you now do when they say, I loot the corpses? And this is especially true when it's a random encounter, or perhaps it's something that's just happened on the fly and you're not entirely prepared for it. Well, these are the topics that I usually keep in the back of my head, especially if I hide away from them, that I kind of go through when I'm assigning treasure after combat. And I find it's very useful almost to not necessarily have prepared the treasure up front, because it allows me to use these to have the flexibility that I want in order to be able to move forward. So now, fingers crossed, if we look at these, we've got used, expect, useful, plot specific, balance, and of course unexpected. So let's have a look at those, hopefully. Now, when we talk used, what was used in the combat by the enemies so frequently, and this of course is a computer game problem all over every computer game you come across, is the enemies are all wearing armor, they're all using stuff, they're all doing stuff, they're all carrying weapons and that sort of thing, and yet you can't loot those from the bodies. That's so frustrating. Now, of course, I'm not advocating that players' characters suddenly start stripping every corpse they come across so they can resell that leather armor later on, although I have had some groups who've done that. But of course, that's the exception, not the norm, I would hope, anyway. So the idea is, what did they use in combat? That obviously is available to the characters. That's available to the players. And that is something that they can obviously pick up. What's practical? What would they practically have on them? This band of orcs that have just suddenly been attacked by PCs for having just done nothing but stand around, really. What were they doing there? What practically were they carrying with them? Were they moving camp from point A to point B? Were they on a raid? Were they doing certain things? Were they going to go and assassinate someone? So practically, what would they have had with them? You think about the adventurers who are attacking these unfortunate monsters. They've got a backpack full of stuff. They've got candles and caltrops and chalk and all those little bits and pieces that old school gamers still carry with them. I know I certainly still keep all of that stuff in the backpacks that I take. But the idea is that you're going to have this practical nature. What are they carrying with them? And then, of course, historically, what have historically these characters carried with them? So if we look at something like, say, Drow from the Dungeons and Dragons setting and various other settings that adopted them, the Drow traditionally have poison on them, those kinds of things. That's something that you can then add in there. So your players kind of go, okay, well, we know historically they have poisons and things, so that's what we need to bring on. Now, just because the comments are flying. My eyes keep getting drawn there, so I apologize for that. I will try and answer questions at the end of the whole piece, unless you want me to break it up as we go through and we kind of discuss this. But I kind of feel like we should be discussing this at the end so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Hopefully you agree with me. All right, so that's historically. We can then look at what the character should be carrying with them. Now, we also need to look, of course, at expectation. You know that expectation on my channel is a very big thing if you've watched my videos before. So when we talk expectation, we're talking culturally specific expectations. We know that, say, the Klingons have bat'leths and mechleths and daktargs, all those wonderful Klingon weapons that if you're a big Star Trek fanatic, you will know about. So we know that they culturally have those with them. So perhaps that's something that you can add into the treasure. Perhaps it's something that's been used before. If the party was attacked by an assassin who used a blow dart against them to try and drug them but failed, they then chased that assassin. They didn't catch the assassin, but then later on they catch the assassin and use that blow dart. They catch the assassin should have the blow darts with them. That's something that's very, very important. Is, of course, if it has been used before, they should still have it. You don't necessarily have to come up with a reason why they don't have it, but if frequently cool stuff that they used to have, they suddenly don't have when the PCs capture them, you're going to be into trouble. And of course, known to use is, again, it's more kind of like culturally specific, but I should have muted other sounds. I hope you didn't hear that. Anyway, culturally known to use is things like the fact that wizards are known to have a spell book. All wizards have spell books in Dungeons and Dragons. Sorcerers obviously don't, and warlocks don't. Okay, so some wizards have spell books, and we expect them to have those. So why is it when players, characters encounter wizards, they don't necessarily have them? Well, that's just because we've forgotten to get the known to use function of our treasure rewarding kind of process. Now, we then talk useful. So now useful is a little bit of a, I don't want to say cheat because that causes so much problems, but it's something that you can do to make the game move forward. So let's say, for example, your party is heading off to go and storm a castle, and you've planned that the way that they're going to get in, once they get to the castle, they're going to do some reconnaissance, and they're going to realize that, yes, of course, this is the way they're going to get in, and the way they're going to get in is they're going to climb over a low wall near the swamp because no one patrols there. But the party doesn't have any rope, they don't have any grappling hooks, they've got nothing prepared whatsoever because they're new players, or they just took it for granted that they'd make their way across. Well, that random encounter of bandits that they have, the bandits might be carrying rope. Yes, you inserted it after the fact. Of course, after the fact that you had prepared this encounter, but it's there so that the adventure can carry on, because otherwise what's going to happen is your players are going to get there, they're going to get to that specific spot, they're going to see the wall, and they're going to go, oh, we don't have any rope, right, we've got to go back and get rope. It just slows down the pace. It's a minor thing. You can just drop it onto a creature, and bingo, your campaign, your story, your adventure keeps moving forward. And then, of course, it could be useful for the PCs themselves. Perhaps they need light, they need a candle, they need a hood, or they need a this, or they need a that. Who knows? The idea, of course, is that this could just be something that they might need, or that they could use later on. And sometimes it's also just to make the PC feel special. Let's say, for example, the player has decided that their character collects little wooden horses or little horse miniatures. Who knows? I mean, anyway, perhaps you just throw that onto the corpse. What that does is that creates the PC, that gives the player the sense that you have listened to their backstory, you have listened to what they've been doing, and you've added that to your game. How spectacular, how wonderful for the player to have that kind of moment, and what a great opportunity for you to be there and to sort of show the players that you do listen and you do actually care about their backstories. Now, we can also look at plot specific. So if it's linked directly to the plot, that makes sense. It can also be an idea that it helps advance the plot. So it's the scroll. It's the idea that he uses, well, the scroll is linked somehow to the plot. I'm getting distracted. Sorry, I'm looking at all the comments and stuff. Anyway, so the idea is it's linked to the plot. It is something that is directly related to, or it helps to make it clearer. That often is very, very useful. Assassin is found, something on that assassin, maybe it's a ring, or it's a particular type of tabard or a tattoo, whatever it is found on that character, and it links directly to the plot, or it helps the plot move forward. And that can be really useful. A random encounter oftentimes is used more as a precision instrument, in my case anyway, to just guide players back onto the right path. It could also start another plot. So I've done that in many of my role-playing games, and one of the examples I can think of anyway that comes to the top of mind is in the Windswift game on the Bacon RPG channel that I run. Is they were offered this treasure for having done certain things, and it was this really scale mutated arm. They didn't think anything of it at the time, but we're now 3 or 4 adventures later, and they suddenly start to realize that the two are linked. Or are they linked? They don't know it. I'm not going to tell you either, just in case they might be watching. Wow, we're up to 109, 110 watching now. I'm blown away, guys. I really am. Thank you. I hope it's worth your time. Right, so it could start another plot. It could also end an old one. So let's say there was a plot that was going on, it didn't really conclude satisfactorily, or perhaps you didn't capitalize on that end moment. The PCs thwarted a band of brigands, and the townsfolk were grateful and that sort of thing, but some of the brigands escaped. What if they now find a letter on the corpse of this assassin, written by one of those brigands saying, "Oh yeah, we've come across those before. You might be wary of them. They're incredibly crafty. Just give them a wide berth." Now that's nothing. That's a throwaway. It's literally just a little piece of paper. It's a note you're dropping in. But by golly, those players are going to puff up like pigeons, because what a sense of this world existing beyond them and outside of them, and their reputation expanding. And this is just from a random piece of treasure that you're dropping in. Is it treasure? Is it worth gold? No, it's worth much more than that. It's worth player investment in your game, and that's really what we're looking for. It can also help bring balance. So if certain PCs are unbalanced and they're not getting their fair share of treasure, or they're not accepting treasure. That's my current trick with the current players in Windswift, is they're not very treasure focused. They don't really loot everything that they go past. So to try and give them treasure becomes tricky. So you can use it just to balance out. The PCs are lacking something. Maybe don't have something that they could use, or perhaps they've got an NPC who could do with something, and here now is the item for them. They've got a horse, and it's a horse that just carries their supplies and saddlebags. It has no value other than that they've called it Bill. There's a reference for you. It's Bill the horse, not the pony, and he's just carrying stuff. He's just an NPC animal that follows around, and the party likes him. So now you give them, say, a saddlebag of holding. That's really powerful, except that it only works on horses, or it only works on, hoofed animals, or whatever the case. I mean, you get the idea. The idea is that it's an item specifically for the NPC. Again, though, what this does is now suddenly Bill the horse has got this bag of holding. He's suddenly now useful. He's suddenly now becoming a lot more valuable to the party. And that means that later on, when, of course, you abduct Bill the pony, because of reasons, the saddlebag goes with him, but the players are much more inclined to follow that adventure. They're much more inclined to go on that adventure if they like Bill. So rewarding treasure post the combat is incredibly useful as a tool for just building in those loyalty from your players. Now, unexpected, this is the last section, so we're nearly done. So again, thank you for staying with me on this, the very first live stream. That's why it's a little bit shaky, but the idea of unexpected, and this is something that I do frequently, and it's a little bit of a thing, I suppose. My players expect it now more often than not, so I have to sort of change my game to keep them on their toes. But unexpected is something that's humorous. Like in Bacon Battalion, which kicked off that channel that I run, the characters found in an old box a fish-shaped dagger, which when they drew it from its sheath, it suddenly became this live sardine, mackerel, fish thing that just wanted to get into the water until they stabbed it in somebody, and then it became a bloatfish, and it just or pufferfish, and it expanded out and it did lots of damage. So it was this humorous type of thing. It wasn't really useful except under very specific circumstances. You can also use it to seed. Now, if you don't know what seeding is, that talks to placing an object or an idea or a thought into the game at the moment. It has no relevance, it has no value whatsoever here and now, but 3 adventures later on, it might start to surface and have some value as the players build connections between these seeds. I've done videos on seeding on the channel if you really want to go and have a look at that. So you could use it to seed stuff, and then you can just put in some different stuff. Like, what happens if that patrol of orcs that they came across, well, really were just moving from point A to point B, and one of the orcs has got a little orc doll that he's carrying with him for his daughter. They have families, they have lives that they're living, so why wouldn't they have something like that? So it's something out of the ordinary. It's not just, well, you find 5 gold, 16 silver, there's 3 gems, and there's a magic sword +1. Now it's a little doll for a little orcish child. Good luck finding a party who goes, yeah, I cut the doll in half and wait for the little orcish child to grow up so I can cut her in half later on. It's going to be tricky to find a party who does that. You've now created an extra adventure where the party now maybe wants to take that doll and give it back to the daughter, or who knows, who knows. Maybe that doll is for the daughter's chief's daughter, and if you have your PCs with that and they've got it on them when the orcs find them, oh, it could lead to all sorts of things. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to create more adventures. So give out treasure, but don't give out the regular kind of stuff. And yeah, you can give out the gold, or you find some pouches and things, but no one ever gets really excited over finding cash. But maybe about finding these kinds of things, useful, practical, helpful things, things that one expects, things that are useful, will be of significant benefit. Who knows? Well, your players will give you feedback, certainly, on the stuff. I still have people talking about the fish dagger and the talking horse, and it's those kinds of things. All right, so now we get to the question and answer phase, which is really what I was hoping to do with this live stream. And I can see there's questions going. And yes, Dawn Forged Cast, I begged you to be here. I was on my hands and knees half an hour before. And I mean, we're at 130 people now. This is fantastic. This is a huge audience. I used to lecture, I think my biggest class was 100. So we've broken that record. Anyway, so right, let's have a look at some of these questions. So let's see, we've got, why don't you give your players more magic items? Well, I try, I really do. And if you're referring to the Windswift, absolutely. I do try and give them magical items when they bother to search the corpses. Now, sometimes they don't, so then I have to try and give them a reward. So, and it actually spawned more adventures. If you look at Blackston, he was given this magic sword and a ring, which he actually prevented one of the other players' characters from stealing. And then he returned it all the way back to the Drow Underdark. So he took literally treasure and turned it into this quest, which became quite a long and complicated adventure series. So sometimes it just doesn't work out, and there's not much you can do about it. You can't intervene. You do get loot whores who just like to keep everything close to them. Thankfully, in my parties, I don't have many of those. All right, so let's see. Are there any? How much is too much gold? Well, that's always a tricky question, and I learned a valuable lesson when I used to give my players lots of gold, because I used to feel that, oh, I'm giving lots of gold, and my players would go, oh, yeah, I can buy this, and I can buy that, and I can buy the next thing. I would end up having to try and take away stuff that I had given them because they were becoming too powerful too quickly. And if they've got too much gold, then they can start to do things very, very quickly. So I'm running a one-on-one game at the moment with a very good player, and what he's done is he's realized his character is not very strong, so he has decided that he is going to use his position to actually hire and buy people to work for him. Now, he happened to work it that he has agreed to blow up a city. It's quite a complicated story, and he is only level 3, so good luck to him. But he's decided he's going to blow up a city, and he's got a benefactor. Now, this benefactor has given him 10,000 gold to do this. So he's slowly starting to hire bodyguards, he's hiring assassins, he's slowly making his way around, but he is spending that money. He's not wasting the money on silly things like buying magical items and that sort of thing, because he feels his character's not that way. So I suppose when it comes to cash, it's about giving the players enough that they've got cash to do what they want, because unless your campaign is about cash-strapped characters, I would make sure that they have enough to do what they need to do without sort of having to worry about it. Again, another memory that I had was, you see the danger of asking me questions. You see how I just start going on, and you're going to have to type stop at some point. No, actually, I'm going to stop this at exactly half past to make sure that we don't overrun and those sort of things. But in the one campaign I played, one of the very first campaigns I played, we were completely cash strapped. The GM refused to give out cash, or if he did, it was in coppers. And I'll never forget my wizard. We actually spent an entire session where my wizard was off at an inn doing magic tricks to try and earn some copper. The ranger was out hunting for badgers and ferrets and stoats and things to try and get skins to sell. I think the warrior was working in a blacksmith shop. But even then, he only gave us like 5 copper a day because he said, well, that's what peasants would earn. So that's what you're going to earn. So I look upon that time fondly in a way because it was one of my first sessions. But in the other way, it's like, well, if that's what his adventure plan was, then that was fine, then that worked. But again, I would be nervous there. All right, so another question here from the Overmind. What do you feel about having random loot tables with different percentage availability based on how good the loot is? And how do you feel about personalized items? Well, personalized items I absolutely adore. I don't think I have ever really used a magic item from any of the manuals. I'm looking over here because my books are over here. I haven't ever, I don't think, just used a stock standard magical item. I've always tweaked it and changed it to fit my campaign. As to the idea of and I've completely forgotten your question now. How do I scroll up in this thing? You see, this is what happens when you do your first one. Magic loot tables. Yes, the random tables and things. Absolutely, random tables. I mean, random tables have been around since Dungeons and Dragons. I think even second edition the DMG had random tables, A, B, C, D, all the way up to J or K, I think. And you'd kind of roll percentiles and different things to sort of generate stuff. That's fine as long as that's not the only treasure that you assign to the creature or to the environment or to the situation. Bearing in mind, again, it's kind of going back to this stuff. If you are facing off against an orc and you happen to roll on those random tables and this orc happens to have this really powerful item or a really expensive gem and that kind of thing, to me, there needs to be a story behind it. And if a table has told you what that thing is, it doesn't tell you the story behind it. So it can inspire you to come up with a story, but I would roll on those tables and then go, okay, he has that because of this reason. And my players could find out about that because he's got it in a pouch that has this monogram on it or something along those lines. Someone's asking another question, what time is it? I'm in Japan, Tokyo, so for me it's 2:30 in the afternoon. I kind of wanted to sneak this live session in to not get too many people. We're 160 people, wow. To try and not get too many people to watch so that they wouldn't see my disaster. So far I've only done 2 things wrong. No audio at the beginning of the show, and I forgot to put my jacket on. So this is naked DM basically. Anyway, all right, more questions. We've still got some time here. I see there's lots of advice being given. Questions. System 5th edition D&D. This is from Vic Harris. What do you think about body parts as loot? And how would you get your characters to chop up enemies for these elements? Yes. Okay, that's a great question. It is a form of loot, isn't it? But it is also an established form of loot. So first of all, D&D 5th edition, I would go straight to nature and medicine checks. You've got to know where you're cutting. You've got to know how you're cutting. I spent a year as a wildlife cameraman working in some of South Africa's bigger game reserves. I was present when they were skinning lots of animals, and let me tell you, if you don't know what you're doing, you will puncture, pierce, or otherwise perforate, how's that, all those P's, and a vital organ and render it completely useless. So absolutely. And remember, again, it's about that expectation. If the players are expecting to find a gland that releases fire or however the biology of your world works, then they should be able to do that. They obviously should have the necessary skills to be able to extract it. I mean, I certainly, even though I've witnessed these kind of dissections and things, I certainly wouldn't know really how to best remove a heart from a corpse to preserve it and to keep it well. And of course, you've got to store it as well. I mean, it's about having glass jars available if that needs to be fresh. So it's up to you really how far you want to develop that. So I did a video on plants the other day where I was talking about how plants can really enhance your game. internal organs is a great idea. It's kind of a bit macabre in one way, except that every culture uses them in different ways. And just having moved here to Japan, the amount of internal organs that are considered commonplace for culinary uses literally terrifies me. It really, really, really does. All right, so let's have a look here. Guy, part-time ranger. Well, I was filming people being rangers and that sort of thing. But yes, I couldn't track. The only thing I can track really is a burger in a shopping mall. I have a PC looking to forge magic items. So that's going to be interesting to manage. Yes, of course, the crafting system. Now, this is something that was interesting. I was working with Ask a Pathfinder, Michael Kessevin, the other day. We were sort of thrashing out some ideas for game systems and things. And for him, crafting was a huge thing. He wanted a very complicated mechanic on how to craft and stuff so that players didn't use it to their advantage, to be able to basically get stuff for half price and use their downtime outside of campaigns to generate material. Now, I'm not a huge fan of that. Absolutely not. Yes, the idea then, of course, with the crafting is how do you let it happen? How far do you take it? How difficult do you make it? And as far as I'm concerned, those forges, finding places to do that, they should be expensive. They should be difficult to get to. All right, another question here. This is from Kimlar. How do you feel about giving options, such as you can take 150 gold now, or a chit promising a favor from me in the future in place of standard rewards sometimes? I'm going to say I love that. Here's a chit, aka an adventure plot, because this chit, when you hand it in, is going to lead to the goons who actually have control over the person, or that chit is no longer valid, or I mean, absolutely. If your players are going to do that, they are handing you adventures on a plate, and that for me is golden. Of course, the idea is to balance. Yes, here's a chit, and it works. It works beautifully. Yes, it moves forward, and off you go. Of course, that does start to talk about banking systems and things, but that's a whole different kettle of fish altogether, and absolutely. And I see World Anvil is busy mind melding with Dawnforge Cast on the channel. That's fantastic. We have nothing against Vulcans here. Any last questions? Yes. What kind of items would you put on an undead? They typically don't use weapons and usually don't have much on them. Well, yes, absolutely. A good morning, Germany, I see. That's just come in there. Guten Morgen. All right, so, yes, magic items on undead. Skeletons are generally buried bodies that have now been raised, or they're soldiers who have been slain. So I'm not sure off the top of my head what skeletons would normally get for treasure, but coins and pouches and things, yes, absolutely, that's a problem. But what if that some of the skeletons, one or two of the skeletons, had gold fillings in their teeth? There's some treasure for you straight away. What if the items that they're carrying, maybe you say they're unarmed, absolutely, but maybe they're wearing a piece of leather which hasn't rotted away, and that's a belt of, say, immortal, that's the wrong word, I've completely lost my words. Maybe that's a belt of everlasting endurance. So the belt will never perish, ever. It will never break. It is like Tupperware. It'll just last forever and ever and ever and ever and ever until someone loses the lid. So yes, absolutely. It is tricky, especially with things that don't necessarily naturally have treasure. But then you've always got the internal organs, as someone pointed out earlier on. And yeah, so it is about being creative, about sort of running through that. And if they don't have any, they don't have any. There's also no rule saying, thou shalt give out treasure every single time. It is something that that one has to bear in mind. All right, we've got time for one more question before I end the stream. I'm having so much fun. I really am. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, thanks to your videos, I've been running my first game, yay, of the Adventuring Guild, the Laughing Dragon. One of my players is a cook and wants to cook a centaur for twice the ribs. Evil act. I love our hobby. I love our hobby, don't you? I mean, it's fantastic. Yes, the centaur does actually have a double set of ribs. Is it cannibalism if you eat the top half of the centaur? Well, that's a moral and ethical dilemma. I don't know about that. The lower half horse Well, I'm not sure. I suppose yes, you would get double ribs. They could cook them. I don't think it's an evil act if the centaur was attacking necessarily. I don't see it as being cannibalism. A lot of times centaurs are presented with having humanoid features but are not actually human. So I would say probably not. An interesting fact, horse meat, when you cook it and boil it down, gets the title chevril, which is similar to bovril, any of you from the UK or from Europe. Chevril is basically boiled horse meat. And I know this because they used it during the Boer War in South Africa, where they ran out of meat, so they started to eat their own horses and they boiled them down and made chevril. Anyway, that's a horrid, horrid thought. So I'm going to go over time a little bit here and just say, is there anything more, any other questions popping through as I scan through? I know there's probably dozens that I've missed, but I'm only one person, so you have to forgive me. Would there be... Okay, so here's a question. The baker of banana bread. Well, I happen to love banana bread, so you get the last question. Guy, would there be a way that we can give the PC something that actually anchors the player's power or reduces it without being a slap in the face? Well, you know, that's a really interesting question. And the challenge that you have, the real challenges you have is, as you say, you don't want to disenfranchise the players. You don't want to do that. You don't want to punish them by giving them these cursed artifacts. So what I usually do is with cursed artifacts, they're cursed, yes, but why would anyone use them if they're so bad all the time? The last cursed artifact I gave out was a demonic sword that had inscribed upon the blade, use this weapon, but it will use you. Strike your foes, but it will strike you. And so basically what happened was every time the character made an attack, they had to make a constitution saving throw, point number 1, and point number 2 is they then had to roll a d10. Now, the constitution saving throw, this was a D&D 5th edition game, if they failed the constitution saving throw, the sword will deal damage to the target that they hit, and then take an additional 1d6 damage from the player and deal more damage to the target that they hit. So in other words, it's upping up their damage. So hit points for damage. If on the d10, I think they rolled a 9 or a 10, when they struck the opponent, the blade would take damage from the player and heal the target that they struck. So there was this sort of balance that kind of happened. Then of course I evolved it later on. My magical items never stay the same. They always change and grow and adapt, just to keep them interesting. Is later on that blade, when they would strike undead, the blade would then have this massive constitution saving throw, and if the undead was destroyed, it was sucked into the blade. It was a sort of a negative energy type of weapon, until eventually it had enough undead souls, or undead energy, I suppose, necromantic energy, trapped inside of it, that it would then release the demon that this sword had been built around, and the demon, of course, would then consume the user and all those kinds of things. So absolutely, I think cursed items is a subject all on its own, and it's something that one has to be very, very careful with, to make sure that your players don't suddenly start casting detect magic before they touch a simple wooden spoon at a tavern and something like that. Anyway, guys, that I'm going to, hopefully this is going to get posted up later on for everybody else who couldn't make it, to see we're at 174 viewers. I think that's spectacular. Thank you, especially for such short notice. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. And didn't get to my questions. Kyle Starr, yes, I'm sorry. I need like 6 eyes. You know, I was musing as I was sitting down to start this. Last, very, very last small point. I used to do TV shows, and to do this, to do a live broadcast with titles and with animations and all that kind of stuff, would have taken 8 people back in the day when we used to have all this fancy equipment, of course. So anyway, it's now just good old-fashioned me. Keep your comments going. I'll post the video up. And of course, thank you. If this is successful, would it be, and this is something that I'd like you to jot down in the comments perhaps, would it be something that you'd like to see more of? And of course, at a better time frame, we'd sort of angle it more for sort of maybe Central Atlantic time, if there's such a thing where the Atlanteans are up and everyone else is asleep. I don't know. We'd try and work something out. Anyway, if it is something like this, then that would be fantastic, and I'll look to do more of that, because I do want to give back to you guys as much as you have given to me. Anyway, before I wax lyrical anymore, I want to thank you for being part of the show. Thank you for your wonderful, wonderful questions. I'm seeing lots of yeses here. That's fantastic. And I wish you and yours, wherever you happen to be, the very happiest of gaming.